Now, if there's one thing that 2025 proved is that cinema can still move in completely unexpected directions. We had crowd-pleasing hits, delicate character studies, fractured genre experiments, a couple of films that felt like they were dug straight out of a filmmaker's subconscious, along with, of course, a whole lot of crap. Here at Vinyl N Celluloid, I want to share with you the films released this year that stayed with me, the ones I kept returning to days later, the ones I kept recommending to friends who politely pretend to like my taste. So, as the year is coming to an end, here it is, my top 10 films of 2025. Now, this one here isn't a biopic about victories. It's about what happens between the wins. Yes, this is the superior Safdie brothers directed film. You know, the one without the dolled-eye awards-hungry actor attached to it. The Smashing Machine follows real-life MMA fighter Mark Carr as he battles opioid addiction, a collapsing marriage, and the pressure to remain perfect whilst everything inside him slowly caves in. Rather than racing through career milestones, the film lingers in quiet, reflexive moments, revealing a simple paradox. The more physically powerful Carr appears, the more emotionally fragile he becomes. It also marks the first time Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson fully disappears into a dramatic role, and somehow made me care about a biopic I should have bounced off entirely. This entry is the kind of film that never shouts and somehow leaves the deepest mark. In a year lacking new releases from Nicholas Winding Refn or Paul Schrader, Edward Berger quietly steps in to fill in the late-night existential void. Colin Farrell plays a high-stakes gambler who retreats to Macau after his past and his debts catch up with him, drifting through nights of chance, encounters, and false escapes. The film moves with a slippery, haunted calm, floating through dim corners, strange choices, and a very specific kind of loneliness. It's about people pretending they have control while slowly realizing they've already lost it. With strong performances, surrealist touches, and Macau used as a vibrant, enigmatic backdrop, Ballad of a Small Player failed to make much of a mark with critics. But this Netflix release has far more to offer than its reception suggests, and it's quietly waiting to be discovered. Now, this one is the kind of title that pulls you in with its stillness and then refuses to let you go. Based on real events, The Testament of Ann Lee follows Ann Lee, the founding leader of the Shaker movement, proclaimed by her followers as the female Christ, as she establishes a utopian community defined by worship through song and movement. In the hands of Mona Fastvold, what could have easily been a rigid or referential historical drama becomes something vivid and alive, shaped less by exposition than by rhythm, texture, and presence. Every frame feels lived in. Every gesture carries weight. The film is careful without being fragile, the kind of experience you absorb rather than analyze. At its center, Amanda Seyfried dominates the screen with a bold, commanding performance, one that carries a calm intensity you simply do not see every year. Now, this is an interesting one. At first, Reflection in a Dead Diamond plays like a stylish genre exercise. Then, it quietly turns into something far more personal. When a mysterious woman in the room next door disappears, debonair 70-year-old former spy living in a luxury hotel on the Côte d'Azur is forced to confront the demons and darlings of a lurid past, where movie-making memory and madness collide. Now, I'll admit the first 20 minutes had me about as lost as Homer Simpson watching Twin Peaks.
Brilliant! I have absolutely no idea what's going on.
But that disorientation turns out to be the point. Elegant, sharp, and surprisingly emotional, the film keeps circling a single idea until something honest finally cracks through, shredding its layers without relying on twists. What emerges is a quiet reckoning with aging and the late fee one pays for living too intensely. A film that starts cold and ends up hitting with far more force than you expect. Yes, it's time for the third biopic on the list. Not bad for someone who doesn't like them. But how can you deny the value of a movie that plays like a conversation between decades? Set in Paris in 1959, Nouvelle Vague follows a young Jean-Luc Godard as he battles conventions, budget chaos, and skeptical producers to make his debut film alongside collaborators who are about to reshape cinema without fully realizing it. Richard Linklater's work is an ode to a movement that still shapes how films look, move, and think. Confident, Cool and sometimes abrasive, but never empty, the film unfolds as if it's negotiating its own identity in real time, pulling from the past and reshaping itself on the fly. Stylish without turning into a costume nouvelle vague is a reminder that cinema can be self aware without ever becoming self satisfied. This next entry earns its place on this list because of the execution of a thriller where the tension comes from pressure, not spectacle. Set during Carnival Week, the secret agent follows a university professor traveling from Sao Paulo to Recife in hopes of reconnecting with his only son, only to realize he's being watched, tailed, and quietly absorbed into a web of corruption with no clear exit. If there was ever any doubt that Brazilian cinema is in the middle of a renaissance, Kleber Mendonça Filho puts it firmly to rest. Following the international impact of I'm Still Here, this film shows how stories rooted in Brazilian social realism can travel far beyond the so-called barrier of subtitles. Where Walter Salles' film was expansive, Mendonça goes inwards, telling a more focused story with a dry, ironic tone shaped by political thrillers rather than elegy. Corruption here isn't abstract, it's ambient. It lives in offices, alleyways, and the uneasy calm of everyday life. Led by Wagner Moura, the film moves fast without ever feeling mechanical, circling paranoia, identity, and survival with precision. It's a reminder that minimalism can still be cinematic when every scene knows exactly what it's doing. What do survivors owe to justice? Restraint or revenge? That question sits at the center of It Was Just an Accident, a moral fault line that Jafar Panahi approaches with devastating calm. The film follows an auto mechanic who believes he has encountered his former torturer and kidnaps him, only to realize that certainty is impossible. The sole clue is the squeak of a prosthetic leg, and confirmation must come from other survivors, each carrying their own version of the truth. Working under severe restrictions, Panahi turns limitations into precision. Shot without official permission and stripped of spectacle, the film leans entirely on behavior. The camera observes rather than judges, and every scene feels provisional and tense. For much of its runtime, the film moves with an unsettling lightness, flirting with dark humor and genre play, before withdrawing that comfort entirely. By the final stretch, ambiguity hardens into consequence. Waiting becomes damage. This year's Palme d'Or winner is a title that refuses escalation or release, and that's exactly why it works. Not a story about answers, but a reminder that the question still hasn't been solved. Palpable tension, two words that describe almost every moment of this entry. I'm talking about sentimental value. In his latest film, Joachim Trier expands beyond his usual small-scale intimacy into an ensemble-driven family drama, without losing the closeness that defines his work. The story follows Gustav Borg, a once celebrated director, attempting a comeback by adapting his own family history and the emotional fallout this creates for his daughters, Nora and Agnes. At its core, the film asks an uncomfortable question. When artists turn their lives into material, is that an act of ailing or exploitation? Gustav uses cinema as a kind of love language, a way to communicate feelings he's incapable of expressing directly. When that gesture is rejected, he retreats, repeating the very patterns that fractured the family in the first place. What makes the dynamic truly unsettling is how normal it feels from the inside. Through the presence of an outsider, Rachel Kemp, played with quiet intelligence by Elle Fanning, Trier exposes the absurdity and cruelty of a system where art, ego, and affection are hopelessly entangled. Anchored by stellar performances from Stellar Skarsgård, Renate Reinsve, and Inga Ibsdotter Lilhos, sentimental value becomes a story about inheritance in every sense: emotional, creative, and moral. The movie understands that sentiment only works when grounded in detail, and the vulnerability carries weight only when it risks misunderstanding. A rare entry that leans fully into emotion without losing its footing. It hits hard, but never cheaply, and trusts small moments to carry everything. Easily one of the most affecting films of the year. Now, this one is one of the sharpest titles I've seen the whole year, and also one of the most uncomfortable. Directed by Park Chan-wook, No Other Choice follows a contented family man who, after 25 years of loyal service, is suddenly fired and decides the only way to secure his future is to quite literally eliminate the competition. Now, the premise invites easy comparisons to the 2019 juggernaut Parasite. This is a very different film. Rather than focusing on the gap between the haves and have-nots, it's about what happens when the promise of upward mobility collapses, when the elevator stops and starts moving in the wrong direction. Chan-wook turns that fear into savage comedy through slapstick, irony, and escalating absurdity. The film exposes desperation as survival instinct rather than ideology. Ambition becomes reflex. Morality becomes negotiable. Laughter becomes a warning sign. Formally, the film is precise and relentless, moving at a pace that never lets you relax. Set largely away from major cities, it gives economic anxiety a grounded, universal texture, one that feels uncomfortably recognizable. Anchored by phenomenal performance from Lee Byung-hun, No Other Choice is a satire that cuts because it doesn't exaggerate enough. You laugh, and then you realize why you're laughing. And that's when it really hits. Before I unveil my pick for the best movie of 2025, here are a few films that just missed the cut but are absolutely worth your time. Resurrection, a bold striking film that pushes cinema to a delirious, maximal edge. Directed by B. Gon, Resurrection plays like a fever dream about cinema itself, mixing science fiction, myth, and film history into a dense, sensory experience. It's radical, overwhelming, and occasionally exhausting, but also unexpectedly moving, staging what feels like both the funeral and rebirth of cinema at the same time. The Piano Accident, a film with a strange magnetic pull, far more controlled and layered than it first appears. Quentin Dupieux delivers one of his sharpest satires yet, blending absurd comedy with genuine unease. Anchored by a fearless performance from Adele Exarchopoulos, it skewers the attention economy without offering easy redemption, landing as one of the bleakest and funniest films about online life this year. Friendship, a deceptively simple film that cuts surprisingly deep. The title plays like a cringe comedy on the surface, but underneath is a sharp portrayal of modern-day male loneliness and boundary collapse. Led by Tim Robinson, in an uncomfortably precise performance, it captures the quiet desperation of wanting connection in a world that increasingly mistakes proximity and attention for intimacy. And speaking of cringe, and because the rule of three demands it, like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe. I know, I hate this part too. There was never any doubt. This is the film that defined 2025 for me. Directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, one battle after another follows Bob Ferguson, a washed-up revolutionary living off the grid with his daughter, forced back into action when his past resurfaces and she disappears. On paper, it sounds like a political provocation. In practice, it's something rare, a film that confronts ideological division without preaching, observing its characters with patience rather than judgment. Violence, instability, identity, belief. Anderson doesn't frame these as abstract debates, but as lived pressures that shape how people love, protect, and fail one another. Leonardo DiCaprio plays Bob as a man hollowed out by conviction and regret, while Sean Penn delivers a ferocious, unsettling turn that collapses the line between villain and tragic mirror. Around them, the ensemble hums with life, anchored by a quietly revelatory performance from Chase Infiniti as Bob's daughter. Formally, it's unmistakably Anderson. Precise editing, razor-sharp dialogue, a restless visual rhythm, and a score by Johnny Greenwood that drifts between menace and melancholy. The film never raises its voice, yet never loosens its grip. One battle after another understands conflict not as spectacle, but as a constant state of being. A story carved from contradiction, empathy, and lived experience. The kind of film that reminds you why year-end lists exist in the first place.